all carbohydrates bad?
Hey, it's Ryan from the Carb Situation. Remember, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a trainer. I'm just a human guinea pig who likes to read a lot and willing to experiment. If you go on the journey with me, maybe you'll learn what I learned. Oh yeah, and I curse a lot. Let's do this.
So I got a great question from a viewer who asks, what about other carbohydrates instead of just junk food? And you're right, my examples almost always include McDonald's or ice cream or sugars or stuff like this. What if you don't really have a problem with that? You don't eat fast food. You don't eat sweets and desserts and things like that. Does that mean that, well, should you avoid all carbohydrates? In this video, we're going to talk about the difference between different kinds of carbohydrates. So first of all, what is a carbohydrate? Carbohydrate is a nutrient that contains carbon and hydrogen, carbohydrate. And carbohydrates come in 3 different styles, flavors, forms. That's the word I'm looking for. Sugars, fibers, and starches. Now, sugars are the worst offenders. And this comes as no surprise to anyone. And sugars include all sugars, white sugar, brown sugar, sucrose, fructose, glucose, high fructose corn syrup, and even fruit juice concentrate. Sugars are the simple carbohydrates, and they're extremely easy to break down and turn into glucose in the bloodstream. They're the ones that immediately bring insulin into the game and cause all kinds of havoc in our body. Now, the next kind of carbohydrate is called fibers. So dietary fiber can consist of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, and I'll get to them in just a moment. The third type of carbohydrate is called starches. And starches consist of potatoes, bread, pasta, cereal, grains like corn and rice, things like this. So fibers and starches are both considered complex carbohydrates. They're a little bit harder for your body to break down, which makes them nice in that they don't elicit an insulin response right away. That being said, they readily turn into sugars and will eventually spike your blood sugar or at least raise it and create an insulin response. And of course, the insulin response is what we're trying to avoid with this whole thing. Now, the key concept I want us to remember here is glycemic index. What is the glycemic index? How much does it raise my blood sugar and how fast? How much is it going to cause an insulin response? Just to give you some extreme examples, something like plain meat is basically going to be 0 on the glycemic index. It will not raise your blood sugar at all. Pure sugar would be like close to 100 because it automatically raises your blood sugar and causes an insulin response. And every food is somewhere in between these. So out of our 3 types of carbohydrates, sugars have the highest glycemic index, are going to cause us the most problems. And I talk about sugars and junk food and stuff like this so often because number one, it's the most prevalent, it's the most addictive, and you don't have to just be eating Snickers bars. All of our foods that are processed are almost always going to have added sugars. Many things that you would never guess, but they have tons of added sugar in them. So those are the worst, the sugars. The next worst on the glycemic index, the starchy carbohydrates, like the potatoes, the bread, the pasta, things like this. And your body has to work a little bit harder to break these down and turn them into glucose so that we can get the blood sugar up and the insulin problem, but they still get there in the end. And then finally, we have fibers. Now, fibers are actually kind of like the good guys because fiber is really hard for your body to digest. And I don't mean hard as in you should avoid them. I just mean it takes a lot of time to digest fibrous carbohydrates. When you eat a food that has a lot of dietary fiber in it, that's a good thing because it releases the glucose so slowly that it doesn't spike your blood sugar as much. So it has a much lower glycemic index. That's why, if you've seen in some of my other videos, I talk about net carbs. If you have a lot of fiber involved in a food, then it's going to digest very slowly and it's not going to create the same blood sugar spike and insulin response, which is great. So fibers are awesome. The only problem is you can't really find fibers just on their own. Fibrous carbohydrates and starchy carbohydrates almost always go together. I think the main exception to this would be kind of leafy green vegetables. They are absolutely fantastic. They contain lots of carbohydrates, but they're fibrous carbohydrates, and they almost never spike your blood sugar. So that's why we always talk about leafy green vegetables so much. Other vegetables too, but like I said, everything is on this glycemic index. So now that I've said all that, we know sugars are bad. And we know that starches aren't as bad, but they're also bad because eventually your body will get to them and they will turn into glucose and they will make your blood sugar spike. And fiber is good, but you can't really find it without starch. So the next question is, how much do these starchy carbohydrates affect us? And that question can be answered by talking about insulin resistance. If someone has been eating carbs for a long, long time and they're very insulin resistant or pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, any carbohydrate that raises their blood sugar even a tiny bit is going to cause a major insulin response, and it's going to wreck everything that we're trying to do. So that's why when we talk about low carb, we do want to avoid basically all of the carbohydrates except for a limited number of leafy green vegetables. If all of the carbohydrates, or more importantly, all of the foods that have a high glycemic index are out of our diet, then we know we have the best control possible over our insulin levels. And when we're keeping our insulin levels low, then our fat is being released to be burned as fuel, our muscles aren't burning glucose, instead they're burning fat, and we're living a much healthier life. So yes, I'm kind of incriminating all carbohydrates, but some people who are not crazy insulin resistant eat the most complex carbohydrates can actually handle small amounts of complex carbs. And I have the exact way to answer that question for you. If you go to my website and download the 2-week carb challenge, it talks exactly about this and how carbohydrate intolerance works. Just go there right now to tcs.wtf and click on that top button for free stuff, get the 2-week carb challenge and read through it, and you'll understand everything that I'm talking about when it comes to which carbohydrates can your body tolerate. That's the difference between simple carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, and why we go low carb across the board for the most part. If you have any discussion or other questions, please leave them below. I would really appreciate it. Remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And like I said, go check out my website. I have lots of other free resources there too, as well as the data from my project and the 2-week carb challenge. Until next time, keep the questions coming and I'll keep answering them. Cheers.